Well, hello and welcome to After the Sermon, a Bethany podcast where we have the privilege of digging deeper into our Sunday messages. I am Tami and today I am joined with Pastor Steve Musto and Pastor David Baxley. David, you are going to be bringing us the message.
Yeah.
And bless you, we are going to hit all of the love verses, and so you are going to be all over God's word.
I would say we're going to hit all of them. Okay. I would say I was assigned all of them. I was assigned all of them.
Okay.
But with a grace that also said, feel free to pick.
Okay, so, there you go.
What jerk assigned you all of those?
I feel like naming names on a podcast is never appropriate, so I'm not going to name a single name.
Here's what I would say. I would say that it was John that did it.
It was
John. He talked about it a a lot. So.
Yes.
And you love John, so it's all good.
I do, yes. Okay. I've actually had a lot of fun. Normally we're so linear in how we think and teach, and that's what I naturally do anyways. Mm-hmm. So I told Steve this recently, I'm like, I actually had a lot of fun. Like it was to really connect sections and see how why he was repeating himself, but not fully repeating himself and things, anyway.
So in fairness, I gave you, I think it was 3, right? So I gave you a chunk from 3, a chunk from 4, and a chunk from 5.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So because John, as we have said again and again and again,
just repeats himself.
And changes the subject and moves to something else and goes, oh, wait, that thing I was saying before.
It's connected to this in this way. Yes.
Absolutely. So I am going to just pick a chunk of what you're reading then just to kind of ground us.
Well, this is the focus. This is kind of the where we're focusing on. Yeah.
So I'm going to read from 1 John 4 and I'm going to start at verse, did we decide 16?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to go through 19. Mm-hmm. And we have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love. And the one who remains in love remains in God, and God remains in him. In this, love is made complete with us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment. Because as he is, so also are we in this world. There is no fear in love. Instead, perfect love drives out fear, because fear involves punishment. So the one who fears is not complete in love. We love because he first loved us. Mm-hmm. Lots of love. In fact, you counted yesterday. How many times love is used just in, was it all of John?
Well, I did it first as a count of all of 1 John.
Okay.
And then I realized it's not mentioned in chapter 1. So it doesn't start till chapter 2.
Right.
If I remember what I saw correctly. And so in 4 chapters, 46 times the word love is used.
In English.
Yes, in English. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, in the CSB version specifically. Mm-hmm. And 46 times we saw the English word love show up in here. And so that's why it sounds so spinny, right? It sounds so repetitive.
Mm-hmm. So is this I'm always looking for, whenever I read a book of the Bible, I always look for what's the famous passage? What's the one that we know? So is perfect love casts out fear? Do you think that's...
No, God is love.
God is love.
There's a statement.
I would say so. I mean, you talk about a phrase that's probably even used by a lot of people, not even knowing what the Bible says. You probably get more of the statement "God is love." Right up there, quoted with John 3:16.
Sure,
more than anything else. Yeah. That's a good question though. Yeah, because there's a lot of quotable things. When you read through 1 John, you realize that you've probably heard a lot if you grew up in the church.
Well, quotable and probably taken out of content. I mean, because I think a lot of times when people say God is love, it means you need to accept me and appreciate who I am. I mean, that.
Yeah.
And finish the thought. God is love. Right. And the one who remains in love remains in God, and God remains in him. So anybody who is outside the faith is like, well, God is love.
Right.
Are you remaining in God? Because that's the rest of the passage. Finish the thought.
That's good.
It's a little bit like, reading the story of the prodigal son and saying, the lesson here is that we should squander wealth, because that's what I read. I mean, I read he squandered the wealth. Well, if you stop the story there, you miss the whole point.
That's good.
And I think we're in danger of doing that. If all we say is God is love, that is a true statement and a theologically rich statement, but there's lots more.
And 16 tells us we need to know what that is. He says we have come to know and believe the love God has for us. Next statement. God is love, and the one that remains. And so, and he says the same phrase back in chapter 4, verse 8. The one who does not love does not know God, because God is love. And so where I don't have time to go in the message, but as we have talked and is definitely a passion area subject for me is, so when we say God is love, what are we saying? Because I think that is, and we just hit this right now, out of context, misunderstood. In fact, I guess I would ask you guys, without, giving the necessarily what we know is the answer, what is it often when people say God is love? You just quoted that, they'll throw that. What are they saying when they want to invoke that phrase, God is love? What are they trying to tell us? Because we hear that outside the church all the time too.
Right. Yeah. Most often it's I don't want you to evaluate my behavior.
Right.
Or the behavior of someone else. I believe this behavior is okay. And if you tell me anything other than that, well, God is love. And you're not being a good Christian.
Yes.
This is there's a pantheon of these things. There's a whole group of these things. Doesn't Jesus say to forgive each other? Doesn't Jesus say to take the plank out of your eye, that judge not lest you be judged? Okay, these are all incomplete statements. And this is part of that little group of incomplete statements that we say in order to justify our own behavior.
That's good.
Yeah, and at the same time to rebuke you on how you respond to me, and to make myself feel good. Yeah, that I don't. Somehow we've defined love, meaning with God, requires nothing of me. Since God is love, I can be what I want, do what I want, experience what I want, whatever it might be. Yeah. And that doesn't matter, because then God will always love me. Right. And the twist of that, would any of us want love defined that way in the closest relationships we have in our lives? Would we ever want someone to, I got to turn that off. Would we ever want someone our spouse, our best friend, our kids, to say, well, the definition of love, you love me, which means now I can treat you however I want. I don't have to treat you well back. I don't have to ask you what it is that's loving to you. I can just say, oh, you love me. I don't have to do anything in this relationship that brings value to it. Right.
Right. Yeah. So this is part of, I think John talks about this a little bit if we go back to 3, he does touch on this, because love is not always love is not letting you get away with your behavior. Love is getting in your face about your behavior. Love is saying, be more like Jesus. You're my brother, you're my sister. You need to be more like Jesus in this situation. And I think there's a piece of that when we say God is love, that we are meaning, but it's almost, when we say God is love to each other, too often what we mean is we mean it as a slam, a criticism, not as a positive thing. Not calling someone to better behavior. Excuse for my behavior, and I don't like what you're doing here. Yeah. But God being love means that there is a standard for us, and it's loving to call someone to that standard.
Because ultimately love is wanting what's best for someone.
Yes.
And
even if that makes it uncomfortable for you and I'm calling you to something better, even if it's uncomfortable. This is the quintessential when you get broken up with in, junior high or high school or college or whatever it is, and they move on. And as much as it hurts, if you really care about that person, you say, but I want them to be happy. I want what's best for them. And if this is where they are in their life, and this is the thing that then there's this part of me that's like, as sad as I am, that's what I want. There's a piece of that in love. As much as this is going to hurt our relationship, if I have to confront you about something or talk about something that's hard, even if it breaks the relationship, I need to do that for between me and God, but also because it's the loving thing to do for you and for your life.
So let's come back to now our image of God. Okay. Again, the God is love. I think the other thing we're often saying when we say God is love is that we're saying we are speaking of what the parts of God or the things about God we like. And we're removing the things about God that maybe make us more uncomfortable, like judgment or wrath. Or even holiness, which invokes these things. And so we're saying God is love. So that means he won't be wrathful. God is love. So he won't judge my actions according to his holiness. God is love. So that means he'll give me grace and mercy, as if only these, those things are the things that flow out of love. And this is why I think having the right theology of love is so important, is when he says God is love, he is saying, and this is what you're saying, Steve, for us as well, his judgment, his holiness, his wrath, his execution of mercy, his execution of justice, his offering of grace, all of that equally has to flow out of love. And I think that seems confusing to most of us. We don't understand that.
Right. That's because fairness and justice are two different ideas. God is just. God is not fair.
Yes.
Fairness is not a biblical value. Go ahead and look for fair in the Bible. Fair is not there. Justice is there. In his core, is one of God's core attributes, is justice. But fairness in making sure that everybody gets exactly the same thing, that is not of God's concern.
No.
But our world, fair and loving, are equated with each other.
Yes.
Justice and loving are not equated with each other. Justice is cruel.
Unless it's against the guy that's judged, that we want justice because that's wronged us.
Right.
We love justice against our quote unquote enemy, against the one that has harmed us.
Yeah.
We think justice becomes perverted when we have to receive that same standard of justice. But the beauty is, in the middle of all of this, God's just, but he sent Jesus to receive what was justly our punishment for sin, so that justice is served. It's not removed.
Right.
It's served. And now I can experience mercy and grace, to which he also sent his son. This is the famous verse, John 3:16, because he loved us and he wanted us to be reconciled with him. But his love was also in needing to execute justice. And Jesus came to take that on so that we could have this opportunity of reconciliation. And that's where John's wanting us to understand, if you really want to understand God's love, if you only see love equal to mercy and grace, you don't understand God's love. Because if you don't understand what sin cost, if you don't understand Christ received this so you wouldn't have to, but if you don't go through Christ, you will receive this, and it is loving for you to receive the justice that is due you. When we don't understand first sin and judgment, we can't properly understand grace and mercy, and we don't bring those worlds together. We don't understand love.
We don't understand love, and then we are incapable of loving the others that the Lord has placed around us. So, wow.
And that's where he comes in, Steve, which is your favorite part of this whole text, which is this heavy tension around judgment, punishment, and fear. And so if we're saying that all those are that judgment and punishment or wrath and all these things are legitimate extensions of God's love, I'll ask you the question, why is that a tension for his audience to say, but perfect love doesn't have that fear and it's not worried about punishment? Again, this is why people feel like it's a contradiction. Why is it a contradiction?
Right.
Or not?
Yeah, we see, even though we don't say this out loud, we see attributes of God as positive and negative instead of all positive. So there are parts of God's attributes that we like and that we tout. And the justice part, the wrath part, we don't like that. We don't want that. We see that as a negative. Like, this is one of the downsides of God. That's how we picture it in our head.
Is the reason why, and this just popped into my head, is because Tami's wrath would be a negative thing, but God's wrath is a positive thing. Is it because we make ourselves little gods, and so those attributes that we think are negative in the Lord would be negative?
It depends on what you mean by negative and positive.
Okay.
Because it's God's wrath is negative in the sense that spending eternity apart from him
is a negative experience.
Is a negative
Yes.
thing. But at the same time, Revelation, the saints who have been martyred in the name of Jesus are crying out for their blood to be avenged. And Jesus says, just a little while longer, just a little
because
while
of justice.
longer. Because of justice, because of the inherent justice of God. The reason God can't just say, hey, look, I know you guys made mistakes. I know sin I'm just going to call an ollie income free. I'm going to wave it all.
Take the Etch-a-Sketch and
It'll
shake
be fine. I'll just shake it upside down. It'll be fine. He can't because he's just.
Okay.
And that is why Jesus needs to come and satisfy the wrath of God, satisfy the justice of God. So that's how those things are all connected. This is not a negative aspect of God's character or his nature. It's a positive thing. We want to see evil vanquished. We want to see sin paid for and pushed away. We want to see the lake of fire burn up all the things that are imperfect.
So now as we even come to that topic, we're wrestling with that he reminds us, so if we understand God's love, and this love is made complete, that we have confidence in the judgment. So he's speaking this idea of judgment when we all stand before God. And then he says, there's no fear in love. Instead, perfect love drives out the fear because fear involves punishment. And so as we wrestle with that, we now come to the other side where he's reminding believers that if you, though, live in fear of that judgment, of that punishment side of God, you're missing something now, though, in your relationship with God. And that's we do need to fully understand God's love and all his attributes that come with that and everything he does in his character. But yet now as believers, there's an experience we get to have in our relationship with God in his love that is unique to us, that he's reminding them, hold on to that.
Yeah.
So what is this thing he's wanting us to hold on to that we get to uniquely experience now as believers that's different for anybody else?
Yeah.
So is that a question you're asking us? What is this thing?
I mean, I've been in this all day and I'm going to teach it on Sunday, but I love hearing others talk about it.
I mean, is the experience is we can live life not bound by fear? Is that the question you're asking? Fear of eternal judgment.
Yeah. And so if we know we need to understand God's judgment, but we aren't to fear it, we recognize, I think there are believers out there, and I would put myself where I've fallen in this in areas of my life, where though I know I may not be experiencing eternal judgment, I can sometimes find myself walking around in fear of the hammer waiting to drop. And though I do think that there's this internal picture that he's speaking to, I don't think he's just speaking to that eternal. He speaks of judgment, but then he comes back and speaks of this tension of punishment. I think we often walk around our Christian lives sometimes afraid that the punishment hammer of God is going to just drop on me. And I've got to somehow just make it to where God's not quite mad enough at me.
So what does that
hammer
look like in a daily walk then? Help me understand what you're saying. Like I do something wrong and I don't know.
Well, the fact that you're asking the question is interesting to me because we are an experiential people. We believe we interpret our world through the lens of our circumstances. So if something goes, if I get a tax rebate, God is happy with me.
Yeah, okay. That's exactly
because
right.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And if my kids are doing okay, then God is pleased with me and this is fine. So when something goes wrong,
yes.
When I have gophers under my shed, oh boy. When the kids are not doing well, when I'm having trouble paying the bills, I'm like, well, what am I doing wrong?
Okay. Because we make it about us.
We make it about us, and it's a twist on the love.
It's a perversion. It's a next level perversion that almost we only do in our Christian circles, where we pervert God's love in a different way than those outside his relationship would.
And I think I'm guilty if I see someone wrestling. There's a part of me that wants to figure out what they did wrong, because then maybe I can not do it wrong to go through the hell that they're going through. I know that's wrong, but I do that sometimes.
And we are always constantly looking for as were Jesus' disciples, by the way.
Yeah.
How come this person is going through this, what did they sin or did their parents sin?
Well, that's good.
Did they go through this? Who is God mad at? Who's God withdrawn his love from in this scenario? And you remember Jesus' answer says, no, this is so God is glorified. This is not so because God is mad.
So when you think that way, you end up, I think, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, having this fear of what's going to happen if I don't perform right before God.
When's the shoe going to drop?
Yeah. And, see, we talked about this several times this week. We see that word perfect. And we start to evaluate not God through that lens of the word perfect. We start to think, well, I've got to somehow be perfect in my love.
Right.
If I'm going to experience God's perfect love, then that must mean I've got to be perfect. And then if I'm not, maybe I won't get the perfect side of love. I'm going to get the wrathful, mean thing or something like that dropped on me. And I cross into this performance for God. But not only do I end up performing for God, which is very destructive to my Christian life, I also do something else. I start to evaluate God with the why would you let that happen, God, if you're really loving? Why would you let that happen if you're really, if I didn't do anything wrong? And we start to critique not only our own lives when things happen, we start to critique the character and actions of God, and we become his judge, which is such a dangerous, and I don't say dangerous like because I'm afraid of God, dangerous to our hearts.
Right.
When we begin to judge God, the danger of what that begins to do to how we view God and then how we view others becomes twisted so quickly. We find ourselves in this, I think, spiral that it's hard to pull out of in our own intimacy with God.
So you're saying not only does fear, we're afraid of judgment, we become judges ourselves then.
Yeah, but and not just of other people. But I think we become judges of God.
Okay.
But the translation of that is if we view the world through the lens of performance and good means I'm good, bad things mean you're bad, I'm going to evaluate God through that lens, myself through that lens, and I'm going to evaluate you through that lens.
Yeah.
And so what he's trying to say is when you understand God's perfect love of who he is and what he offers to you, then that casts out that fear. You're no longer fearing of judgment on yourself. You're no longer acting in judgment toward God. You're no longer acting in judgment toward each other with almost this like despise that he gets into the next part where he's like, person who does not love, how can you even, sorry, I worded it correctly. I love God and hates his brother and sister. He can't even say that. Like he can't put these two worlds together and they all play on each other.
Yeah.
They all play, and we want to think that they're not.
Yes.
But he's coming back reminding us, if this is struggling here in love and you're wrestling with God and who he is, the ultimate end of all this is you are struggling to remain in God's love.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to hear.
Yeah. And you're taking it, when you understand love, you take it out of the circumstantial. Because here's how we've made everything #blessed. I go on vacation, I take a shot of the sunset and it's #blessed. Why? Because I get to see this. That's not why you're blessed. It is it a bless? Is a sunset a blessing from God and being able to? Yes, but don't think that your life is blessed because you got to see this. You get to go where other people don't get to go, or whatever it is. That's not what makes it blessed. We've turned it into that. And when we do that, we also take away the love of God from the people who have a special needs kid. They're not going to ever go on a tropical vacation and see that because they're dealing with what their child is dealing with and they're in the trenches every day, but they see the love of God and they experience the love of God. They're never going to hear their child say, I love you. They're never going to get a hug. None of those things, but they still have the love of God and it's still valuable and it's still, their lives are still worth something. And that little child's life is worth something. And he is, or she is loved by God every bit as much. And just because we're not experiencing what we perceive to be this moment or these moments in the life that we would like, doesn't mean that we're not loved. And so you're right. We rob God and we rob us of an understanding of what love is. So I was going to ask, perfect love drives out fear. So we have Gen Z and after the most angst-ridden generations in American history.
Yep.
Anxiety is the number one mental health problem in our country. So anxiety, fear, perfect love casts it out. If I have anxiety, am I a bad Christian? Do I not love well? Does God not love me? Do I not understand God? Like, what is going on there? And is that even the right use of that passage?
Oh, wow.
This is fun. You're it.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. So, wow, you just unloaded a ton of things. So I'm going to tell you all the things that are processing in my head. When I think about, a lot of that anxiety that we see coming up, especially in the younger generations, and a lot of research has been put into this. So what is the most common thing that they look to, researchers, secular even researchers look to say the origin of a lot of the anxiety? Where is it?
Social media. Yep.
All right. So now we're back to where we kind of started with fear of being judged, fear of how I'm seen, fear of what are people going to view and see me? And so what we're seeing is I am desperately seeking everyone to love me, to approve of me, to consider me valuable, to consider my worth, something that's worth having. And God is saying, but if you can come to me and see how I see your worth and how I see your value, and you can be content, even knowing like Tami may never like my haircut. Right. That just may never happen. Like she may look at this and go, that is just, too much skin, David, like whatever that may mean. But I know like I am fearfully, wonderfully made, and that God loves me and sees me as value and has purpose and things he has for my life that are good for his glory, even if they're hard. The fear of others can begin to melt. The anxiety of feeling like I have to have it all figured out. Because there's almost like, we also see this often with what job I'm going to have. I'm going to go to college. Am I going to get that raise? And even with older generations, what's going to happen to my kids? Well, if I believe that God's love is so good and perfect, that he's in control and that he has this in his hand. And even when something's hard, that I can know that the perfect God of the universe has his hand in doing good with this. Yeah. Then all of a sudden my fear of what's going to happen. Now with that comes trust. I have to trust the love of God. Yeah. And I say this as myself, that's a hard thing to do. And when I am struggling to trust God's love, even in a hard thing, my anxiety is going to go up. Yeah. My fear is going to go up. And so, I as I can say in my own life and though my wife and I have talked a lot about this, and she's really open about her struggle with anxiety, and she'll tell you fear and knowing how to rest in who God really is and how God really sees her. And as I mentioned earlier, my own life is a big root of that anxiety and fear. And I always want to be careful because I think there's medical reasons this happens too. And we're living in an imperfect world and there's chemical imbalances that play a role in this, but yet, even if it's harder, we have this battle of fear in front of us that God's love is an offering to us to help us find peace in opposition to fear.
Yeah. So it doesn't mean the fact that I can't overcome this anxiety. Does it mean God doesn't love me?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Okay, I see where you're going with that. Yeah.
Does it mean that Well, here's the Sunday school answer. No. Well, of course not. No, God loves her. God is love.
Yeah, right.
God loves everybody.
That's our quick Christian answer. Yeah.
So does it mean that I am having a hard time understanding what love is? Or are we completely taking it out of context and saying this doesn't mean the end of anxiety as we understand it?
Yeah, okay.
What this means is we don't have to be afraid of the things that so often make us afraid. And I think we have a perspective. What you just said, David, is a perspective of the world. I don't have to be afraid. Technically, I don't have to be afraid because of what God has done.
Who God is and what he's done.
Who he is, who I am because of who he is and who that makes me. And what is happening in our world, I don't have to be afraid of because ultimately this world is not my home anyway. And I know that I am secure in him and all this. So I have all of these things that I need. I don't always hold on to that perspective well, but God understands that too. And so don't feel like a failure if fear mounts up.
If you're wrestling that way.
And if you're wrestling with that, this is a great reminder. And I have people in my life who do this for me. When I start to tank or when I cannot see over the next hill. You know, all I can see is this hill in front of me. The reminder is, hey, do you remember who I am? From God. Do you remember who you are because of who I am? Do you remember what's going on? And that reminder, it doesn't mean we're never going to have anxiety. We're never going to have fear. Fear can be a good thing. There's some things we should be afraid of. But it means that we don't ultimately have to live our lives in the kind of fear and anxiety that many people do because we have this other perspective.
And are you speaking of a freedom from the control of fear in our lives, I think is what we're saying. And I think that's really important to articulate is God's mercy and grace exists because I'm still going to battle and I'm still going to fall. I'm still going to succumb to something that he's like, even if the answer is God's like, I've given you this so you don't have to have that, but I know you're going to. Because I know you're still battling this. And yes, there's a time coming, my child, to look to forward hope. We get this ton of New Testament where all that goes away. He wipes away our tears. But to know that my love is not shifting or being redefined now as you struggle, even it means, and I can say this in my own life, even it means, as I'm realizing, this is what I'm realizing in my own life recently, as I'm realizing my deficit of God's love, and I'm 41 years old, I've been in ministry for 20 years, teaching, preaching, all these things.
You mean your deficit of fully understanding?
Of fully understanding God's love. Yes, fully understanding God's love.
Because his love is there for you.
Yes, fully understanding God's love. It has not stopped him from loving me or using me. Or being a part of his kingdom. Right. And in fact, understanding my deficit more helps me understand God's love for me even more.
That's good.
And like that, now that's that becomes a battle game sometimes, right? I'm over here, then I need to be reminded to come back. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, but almost in my awareness of my inadequacy, I can find more safeness because I can see all the ways God has still shown his mercy and grace in my life. I mean, I've experienced that perfect love poured out to me when my love was so imperfect, when my understanding of that love was so imperfect, but it was still going to be poured out to me either way. And he wanted me to know how to live in it better. So are
you saying, David, that even in the wrestle, there's grace in that because we get to see and taste who our God is and see his love for it when we're feeling the fear, when we're wrestling, when we're playing the game, when we're reminded we don't need to play the game, we see how good our God is.
I mean, I can look at, I can see my inadequacy of my understanding of even this, right? My own life right now. And now I got to go on Sunday. I'm going to teach on it. And so I got two responses. I can be like, whoa, what's going to happen? I clearly don't get this. Is God going to show up or not? It's not, and you know what? I can look back and be like, I haven't gotten this for a while. And look where God showed up. And look how God blessed me. And look where God met me in my brokenness. And so even a fear of getting up and teaching this, right? That could come in is that if I allow that to take over my view of myself, I can look back and see what God has done, see how that perfect love has been poured out to me. Going all the way back to the cross, I think we should go back there, but I can go back to other moments throughout my life and say, I can rest in this. I may not know what the outcome's going to be, but I can rest in knowing that God is not defining these moments by who I am. He's defining them by who he is. Rest in that, and fear can begin to lessen. I'll still battle, but it can begin to lessen, and its power over me lessens.
Man, buddy, I'll just, one of the problems with teaching is that we can sound like we have it all together, like we've got it figured out. I'm teaching this passage because, you people have got to get it together. And there are things that we teach that we're pretty good at, or that we kind of have. I spoke this weekend on, taking authority. This is something that I've been doing for years and years and years. So I'm practiced at it in a different way. So I teach that message differently, but the value of with humility going up and going, I'm figuring this out. This is hard. Is so important.
It is. And if, as your friend, I think those sermons where I see you knowing I do not have this completely figured out, I think we see God show up in amazing ways. I'm always excited about those sermons.
That's the amazing thing that God does. Because I think we even realize none of us, whether it's that place or any other places in our life, like that's the real God blessing.
Yeah.
God's showing up in our lives with his mercy and grace, and us, even when we haven't even noticed it, God's still allowing us to experience it. That's blessed.
Yes.
That is blessed.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to keep coming back to. And that understanding God's love like that, oh man, like there's just a freedom that I know I don't even fully get, that as I'm tasting it more, even in this studying this week, I hope people can find that more.
Yeah.
Because there's something so beautiful in that.
And really, if God is love and God is God, can anyone stand up on a given Sunday and just totally fully understand it? I don't even think it's possible.
We will not fully understand God's love. And maybe when we see him face to face, we will. Maybe. I'm not even sure we're going to fully, he's still God.
Right.
Yeah, I'm still the created being at the end of the day, and he's still God.
He is bottomless.
Yes. The amazing things that we'll be able to see, I can't comprehend, but I look forward to that.
Our time is up, and it's never enough time for me. I don't know about you guys, but so thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.